The dining room was filled with the clinking of cutlery and the soft hum of conversations. The aroma of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and freshly baked bread should have made the evening warm and comforting. Family dinners were supposed to be moments of togetherness, laughter, and love. But that night, the air felt heavier than usual, carrying something sharp and invisible, something I couldn't quite name until it cut me deep. I sat quietly at the far end of the long table, watching everyone chatter. My son, Daniel, looked proud as ever, telling stories about his office promotions. My grandchildren giggled while fighting over who would get the last bread roll. And then there was Anna, my daughter-in-law, smiling in that perfect way of hers, though her eyes always carried a glimmer of disdain when they met mine. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was in my head. After all, I wasn't here to cause trouble. I had cooked for years, hosted countless family dinners, and now I simply let her take charge. That was fine. Families evolve. My role had shifted, or so I thought. Then it happened. The room grew quieter as the conversations lulled, and I reached for my glass of water. That's when Anna's voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through the air. "You know," she said, looking straight at me with a sweet smile that masked her cruelty. "You never contribute anything to this family." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. I blinked, my hand frozen around the glass. Daniel looked down at his plate, not daring to meet my eyes. My heart squeezed. I searched the faces around me for someone, anyone, who would defend me. But all I found were downcast eyes and uncomfortable silence. The grandchildren, too young to understand, kept eating, while the adults shifted in their seats. Not a word. Not even from my own son. It felt like someone had pulled the chair out from under me, and I was left falling with no ground to land on. After everything I had done, after every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I had cooked, every tear I had hidden, this was how I was seen. As someone who never contributed. The fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto the plate. The sound was loud in the stillness, yet no one looked at me. My throat tightened, but I swallowed hard, forcing my tears back where they belonged. I would not cry in front of them. I would not give Anna that satisfaction. I smiled faintly, though my lips trembled. "I see," I said softly, though inside I was breaking into 1,000 unspoken pieces. No one asked if I was okay. No one apologized for her words. The conversation moved on as if nothing had happened, and I sat there, invisible in my own family, feeling the deepest betrayal of all silence. That night I realized something with painful clarity. I had given everything to my family. And now I had nothing left to give, at least not to people who couldn't see my worth. That night, after the family dinner, I went home to my quiet room. The walls seemed colder, and the silence was louder than ever. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at my wrinkled hands. These hands had worked, sacrificed, and carried burdens heavier than anyone at that table would ever understand. As I sat in the dim light, memories rushed back like waves crashing on an old, battered shore. I remembered the nights when Daniel was just a boy, coughing through fevers. His father, already sick at the time, would sleep unaware. I would stay awake, rocking Daniel in my arms, whispering lullabies I barely had the strength to sing. I would press a damp cloth on his forehead, praying his fever would break. Did Anna know about those nights? Did Daniel even remember? Then came the years after my husband died. I was left with debts, 2 children, and no one to lean on. While my friends enjoyed the comfort of 2 incomes and family outings, I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. In the mornings, I scrubbed office floors until my knees ached. At night, I worked at a bakery, the smell of bread clinging to me as I trudged home half-asleep. I remembered one winter especially. Daniel had asked for a warm jacket for school, but we couldn't afford one. I sold my gold bangles, my last piece of jewelry from my wedding, to buy him that jacket. He wore it proudly, never knowing what it cost me. And there was the time I skipped meals, just so my children could eat. My stomach would twist in hunger as I watched them chew happily, but the satisfaction of seeing them full was enough to silence my body's cries. Sacrifice, that was the only language I knew as a mother, and yet none of it seemed to matter anymore. At that dinner table, all those years of toil, love, and devotion had been erased with one cruel sentence: "You never contribute anything to this family." I let out a bitter laugh, though no one was there to hear it. How easily they had forgotten, or maybe how easily they had chosen to ignore it. For years I had quietly handed over money to Daniel when he struggled with bills. I had watched the grandchildren when Anna needed her me time. I had kept my mouth shut when she redecorated my kitchen, moving everything I had collected over decades, saying it was old-fashioned. I had swallowed my pride when she looked at me as though I were a burden in my own son's house. But that night at dinner, something inside me cracked. I had spent too long convincing myself that silence was strength, that enduring was noble. But silence had turned me into a shadow, and endurance had made me invisible. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Not the kind of anger that burns bright and fades, but the kind that smolders quietly, waiting for the right moment. As I sat there, staring at the walls of my lonely room, I made a silent vow to myself. They would remember who I was. They would learn that my worth could not be measured by their shallow judgment, and above all, they would regret ever thinking I contributed nothing. The days after that dinner felt different. For years, I had carried a quiet weight, accepting slights and swallowing insults, convincing myself that family harmony was worth the cost of my dignity. But not anymore. Anna's words had been cruel, but more cruel than that was my son's silence. That silence had burned deeper than anything else. If my own child could let me be humiliated in front of everyone, what did that say about the bond I thought we shared? So I stopped waiting for their validation. Instead, I started thinking, planning. The first thing I did was visit the small bank downtown. They still recognized me there. I had been careful all these years, tucking away bits of money whenever I could. From my bakery job, from selling a few things that had belonged to me, from wise little investments I had quietly made decades ago. They all assumed I had nothing, that I was just an old woman living off my son's generosity. But the truth, I had more than they ever guessed. I asked the bank manager to help me set things in order. A new will, a trust, clear documents that would determine exactly who would and who would not inherit what I had built. He nodded respectfully, perhaps seeing the fire in my eyes that had been dimmed for too long. Then I called a lawyer. I explained that my house, the very home Daniel and Anna were living in, was still under my name. They never knew that when my husband passed, I refinanced carefully and paid it off on my own. For years I let them live there rent-free, thinking I was supporting my son while he built his future. But as of that week, I decided I would no longer let my kindness be mistaken for weakness. Transfer of ownership, the lawyer asked. Yes, I said firmly, but not to them. I decided instead to place the house in a charitable trust for widows and single mothers, women like me who had been overlooked, dismissed, yet had carried entire families on their shoulders. I could already imagine the look on Anna's face when she realized the house she boasted about decorating wasn't hers to claim. But I wasn't finished. I began keeping my distance. When Anna asked me to babysit the grandchildren, I gently refused. When Daniel hinted at a loan to cover some bills, I smiled softly and said, "I'm not able to help right now." My refusals weren't bitter, just calm, like a river flowing steadily toward its destination. For the first time in years, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. I was no longer bending to their every need, no longer letting my worth be defined by their careless words. Instead, I was reclaiming myself, and as I folded the last copy of my new will into its envelope, I whispered to myself, "They think I never contributed, they'll learn soon enough. My contribution will outlast every one of their..." Shallow judgments. Months passed. The family dinners grew fewer, and the calls from Daniel grew shorter. I no longer expected an invitation or even gratitude. I had found peace in my own independence, in the quiet dignity of knowing I was no longer at their mercy. But fate has a way of bringing moments to the surface, moments where truths can no longer stay buried. It was Daniel's birthday when the next gathering came. Anna, ever the hostess, had organized a dinner at the house she proudly claimed as theirs. The family was buzzing with laughter when I arrived, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, my hair pinned neatly, my face calm. The moment I walked in, I noticed Anna's smirk falter. She wasn't used to seeing me walk with such poise, my head held high. She had always expected me to enter quietly, shrinking into a corner. But tonight I was different. Tonight I had purpose. Dinner went as usual, Anna boasting about her latest shopping trips, Daniel talking about work, the children laughing between bites. I remained silent, sipping my tea, waiting. Finally, when the cake was brought out and the plates cleared, I placed my hands on the table. The chatter died down as everyone turned toward me. "There's something I'd like to share," I began, my voice steady. "A little truth I think this family deserves to know." Anna tilted her head, clearly annoyed that I was stealing her spotlight. "Oh, what is it?" she asked with feigned sweetness. I looked at my son first. "Daniel, when your father passed away, I was left with debts. I worked myself to the bone day and night to raise you. I sold my jewelry, I skipped meals, I sacrificed everything. You've never heard me complain, and I never asked for thanks. But I hoped, at least, that you remembered." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes dropping. Then I turned to Anna. "At the last family dinner, you said I never contribute anything, that I am nothing more than an empty chair at this table. I let your words wound me, but I didn't let them define me." Her smile faltered, but I didn't stop. "What you don't know is this. The house you're living in has never belonged to you or Daniel. It belongs to me, and as of last month, it has been placed in a charitable trust. One day, when I'm gone, this home will shelter widows and single mothers, women who know the meaning of sacrifice, women who understand gratitude." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Daniel's eyes widened. Anna's face drained of color. "You may see me as someone who never contributed." I continued softly, "But the truth is, I contributed more than you'll ever repay. And now, I've chosen to give what I have, not to those who despise me, but to those who will value it." Anna stammered, You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," I said calmly. "You took my silence as weakness. You took my love as obligation. But tonight, you learn that my worth does not depend on your approval." I stood then, gathering my purse, my heart beating steady with a strength I hadn't felt in years. I kissed my grandchildren on their foreheads and walked toward the door. No one stopped me, not even Daniel, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, I smiled, not a smile of bitterness, but one of quiet triumph. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a mother, or a widow, or an invisible figure at the end of the table. I was a woman who had taken back her dignity, and that was my sweetest victory.